Good morning, Alex.
Hello, sir. Man, congratulations once again on the home.
Oh,
That's just
yeah.
huge.
Thank you. Yeah, it's super exciting. We weren't necessarily expecting. We went on vacation on Saturday, and on Friday we looked at a house and decided to make a last minute offer, and it worked out. So now I have to figure everything out.
Well, especially in Seattle, it's just that is a crazy market for buying homes.
Yeah, it really is.
But hey, I at least wanted to showcase this rockin' vintage Power Platform shirt.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny that vintage swag is like a month old at this point.
Yeah. That's from last year's Imbas, right?
Yeah, I think, or was that this year's? I think that's when they had kind of announced the T-shirt winner. So I don't even know anymore. Time is a flat circle during COVID.
Well, I've got some vintage swag of my own. I don't know if y'all can see here, but I got my button from Alex delivered. He's been mailing these out to folks, and I coerced him into mailing me one. So, yeah. So today we're going to talk about probably, at least inside of Microsoft, one of the most commonly asked questions, which is when should I use analysis services? Or actually, when should my customer use analysis services? And when should my customer use Power BI Premium? Yeah.
There's already some great questions coming in from the chat. And if we were to kind of like rewind a little bit, Premium per user is opening up the XML endpoint.
Yeah.
So we don't know like the pricing today, but a lot of these like pricing like conversations, I think they'll kind of be a mute point, and then it'll more move on to what feature set would be most beneficial. If there's like widespread content distribution, I mean that's still like Power BI Premium, just for the unlimited free viewers.
Yeah.
But we'll get into more of the technical things here too.
Yeah. Yeah. The Premium per user is definitely going to make a big difference in the analysis services story, but it's not as straight up as like, oh, you're just going to use Premium per user. Yeah, we'll get into it. Alex, you want to start with the deployment demo just to show that the same model can be run in both places? So it's
Let's go and do that.
Let's go to your
kick over to my screen.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So just Mark, he did an awesome article here, just migrating analysis services over to Power BI using Tableau Editor. I kind of sat down one morning and I was like, all right, I'm going to work through this. I'm setting aside an hour just to see what this full journey is going to look like. Not the case. I was probably in and out in less than 5 minutes. So if you're using Azure Analysis Services today, open Tableau Editor, connect to the server, choose the database. So let's go and do that here now. So just do a new model. And I'll, 1500. Cool. So I'm going to connect out. So let's do file, open. We're going to connect to a DB. So I've got my Azure Analysis Services server address, just using basic Windows authentication here, or Azure AD login. I'm going to select out just wide world importers. Compatibility level is 1500. For those in the chat, or maybe Alex D here, what is the Power BI compatibility level?
It's higher. We'll see if someone gets it in the chat. I think it's in the 1700s. Is that right?
1520.
1520.
So at a kind of minimum here. So compatibility. Let's do this. Once again, I'm connecting out to the Azure Analysis Services. So I've got perspectives, relationships, roles, tables. So all the same things we're doing. It's the same underlying analysis services database. So the one thing they have to do. Oh, go ahead.
No, I think you were going to say the same thing I was going to ask. So.
Yeah. So we're going to do Files, Save As. So I'm saving out the model.bim here now. And let me just put in my downloads. Cool.
So at that 1500 compatibility level, you're using the analysis services feature set, right? So you can't
Yep.
have composite models, and there's a couple other things that you can't do that you could do in Power BI.
Yep.
So that's the
So
first
we're-
reason that you might switch is if you want to use some of these premium only features, then you might want to run in Power BI to leverage those.
So unfortunately, just in Tableau Editor, we can't kind of change or update kind of the underlying structure here. So what I'm going to do is just run out to a text editor. My 1500 here at the very top, I'm looking at the compatibility level. I'm now going to update this to a 1520. Once my machine responds, there we go, 1520. So just Control S. We're just saving the binary file here again.
So now this model can be deployed to Power BI, but it can no longer be deployed to analysis services. So
You got it.
1520 supports everything that 1500 does except OLS. And I think
Yep,
that's
so,
it.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, kind of we'll jump over the matrix here, but a lot of those gaps have been closed. There's still a few functional items where, like, column or table level security are just not there, but perspectives are unlocked. Fairly certain at least translations are in premium data sets.
Yeah, I mean, desktop and the Power BI reports don't handle translations well, but yeah.
So I'm going to go over to File. I'm going to go to Open now. So I'm no longer connecting out to the database. I'm just going to do a local, this model.bim file, because we made that edit here from 1500 to 1520. So then that way we can say Power BI now compatible. Open. It's the exact same Tableau Editor, just reading the model.bim. So we're still good here. And then what we want to do, model here at the very top, we want to deploy. So my server address is no longer going to be analysis services. I'm just going to connect out to kind of my Power BI Premium. So this is using the XMLA endpoint. Go ahead and press next. Get connected here real quick.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
So Donald, it's right. Aggregations are not in AAS, but as you get to the monolithic model deployment models, I find that there's lots of reasons why you might want to do your aggregations by just writing measures with switch statements and is filtered logic instead of using the Power BI aggregation UI. And so, like, yes, you don't get to make aggregations the way you would in Power BI, but you can still get that type of functionality in it just by straight up writing your own DAX. So, yeah, that is a big difference, but like, yeah, we have a Power BI model and we just use DAX aggregations because there's some things we're trying to do that you can't quite do with straight up aggregations.
And you can see here, if we were trying to deploy a model that maybe had OLS, it's just going to let us know, hey, that wasn't compatible. So it does have some of those checkpoints, at least in terms of the current features or functionalities that are just not existing within Power BI. So let me do it one more time here, and then we'll just do kind of all the way through. Do our wide world importers. Yep, deployed roles. And give me 1 second here. Hopefully this one goes through. I haven't touched the wide world importers. Ah, of course. Well, it's very simple. Maybe we'll come back to it then. But
yeah,
all you have to do, update the compatibility level. If you are on like SQL Server analysis services, and especially when you get to kind of partitions, if you are doing a legacy partition, so where it was just SQL or kind of T-SQL, those will need to be updated just to the Power Query. So maybe just look at a simple statement, SQL.database, insert the server, insert the database, and then just copy and paste that code into kind of the new Power Query. Yeah. But let me jump over here, and I'll come back to this here when we switch over to your screen. But Uh, Out on the Power BI blogs, the clear future direction is Power BI Premium. So
Yeah.
starting to evaluate. This is the single tagline I always come back to in every discussion, right here. And then looking at just feature considerations.
Yeah. So that means that the product team wants to get the product to a place where everybody will want to run only on Premium.
Bring your own key. That's now general availability. So this matrix is just a little out of date. Large data set should be coming here, I want to say October for general availability. Scale out.
Yeah.
That's not a feature that's available. Translations, object level security is still one that's coming. Perspectives is currently available. So if we're talking like functional parity conversations, you're like, well, I need Azure Analysis Services. I'm going to go through this checklist and say why.
Yeah.
And then do those benefits, outweigh the functionalities that exist within Power BI?
Yeah.
So data flows, AI, composite models, aggregates.
Report distribution is the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now why don't we switch over to my screen and talk a little bit more. We'll talk briefly about the price difference, as Donald just alluded to, and then we'll talk about Gen 2 and Premium P per user works into this. So this is what I've got here is this is a P3 or an A6 and an S4 which has the same amount of RAM and a VM that has roughly the same amount of RAM and the same cores all the way down. And you can see that and this is a Windows VM and this is a Linux VM. So you can see Premium costs a lot more than the same horsepower on analysis services. And the analysis services cost a lot more than the Windows VM, which costs a lot more than just getting the computer. So that is a big difference. Now you get a lot more with Premium, but if all you're looking to do is run a model, it gets tough. But we're going to talk about how Gen 2 and Premium per user is going to start to change this. We don't know if Gen 2 is going to bring pricing differences, and we don't know what Premium per user is going to cost. But even with that, it's probably going to, the things we're going to talk about are sort of regardless of cost because they're in the structure of how they work. The next thing, we'll just do a quick summary of Gen 2 and Premium per user and how they're different. So Gen 2 means that existing dedicated capacities and new dedicated capacities are moving to a slightly different architecture where one, just the computers that they run on are going to be, I've heard, are going to be faster. So your per core, per clock performance is going to be better. That's really the most important thing for Power BI is having good per core performance. The other thing is that the dedicated capacity, not per user, just regular old P SKUs, are moving to a more of a SaaS model where more of the system will be managed and less of the resources will be made available to you. Premium per user is in addition to the dedicated capacity. So you can run a model instead of running it on dedicated capacity, instead of running it in pro shared capacity, you can run it in premium shared capacity. And so in premium shared capacity, it's still shared capacity. You don't manage CPU. You don't manage memory. You don't have to figure all that stuff out. But instead of having a 1 gig limit for a model and no XML endpoint and none of these pro features, Premium per user is a shared capacity where you can have a 100 gigabyte model and use the XML endpoint. But just like in pro shared capacity, where only pro users can access that model, and premium per user shared capacity, only premium per user licensed people can access the model at all.
And a couple questions here, just pro shared capacity.
Yeah. So for a long time, the way I've, and I'm not the only one, have talked about the difference between, yeah, Adam, you might be right. So the terminology for a long time has been that the pro reports run in this SaaS service where all the capacity is shared and you don't have to manage it. And then premium is dedicated capacity where you have your own CPU and that's it. And nobody else uses it. And premium per user is more of that first model where you just have a data set size limit. Yeah. And so you don't have to worry about CPU consumption at all. And Gen 2, as Adam says, is a different story. So let's talk about how Gen 2 is different. This has nothing to do with premium per user, except that premium per user runs on Gen 2. Yeah. So in Gen 1, if you bought a P1, you would get 8 cores and 100 gigs of RAM. And whatever you wanted to do with those 100 gigs of RAM and those 8 cores, you could do it. Didn't matter. You just always had this. You paid one price, and you'd always get this many cores. Do your refreshes. They run on these cores. Run data flows, run paginated reports, whatever, they run on these cores. In Gen 2, that's not how this works at all. So let me just unwind back here. In Gen 2, if you get a P1, you'll have 8 virtual cores, which means over the course of time, and just pretend that these are, I don't know what the time interval is. I think it's a fairly short, like seconds or milliseconds, but in a given unit of time, you have access over the course of the whole day. You have 8 cores, but you can now, because rearrange these cores in time. So if you have a model that gets hit with a bunch of super heavy queries all at once, you can go up to here and you're still not over your core allocation. And then if nobody uses the model for a while, that's fine. And then you can come and say, now you're like, hey, I need to run my paginated report. And so, oops, I deleted some boxes. So if you're like, hey, I need to run my paginated report, that bursts out, and then nothing runs again. That's fine. But what if you actually go over, and you can rearrange these boxes of CPU consumption however you want. And so you don't have a dedicated CPU, and you don't have dedicated memory. Instead, you'll just be able to get models up to a certain size, right? And so for the P3, it'll be 100 gigs, and for the P4, it'll be 200, and P5, it'll be, but you can have it manages the memory management entirely for you. And so because what's happening is you're not running on an 8-core VM. You are running on a 32 or maybe even like 128-core VM with other people. And so it lets you balance out this workload. And so if you're bursting up to 32 and there's some other person who's running, they'll just run on a different, this lets Microsoft more efficiently use its CPU cores and offer you more performance at the same time for the same commitment from us.
A lot of heads exploding in the chat.
Yeah.
To kind of dial us back then, so traditionally it was just shared capacity, really just shared resources, where premium kind of Gen 1 was you bought a dedicated resource and maybe hit the boundaries of it, and there was no kind of scaling from there. So Gen 2 is really just spreading that workload out. So it's no longer just dedicated infrastructure to your organization. You're now still doing shared resources.
Yeah.
So if that was important to you, in kind of the Gen 1 infrastructure, obviously just continue to let Microsoft know. But this is the direction which it's moving in terms of architecture.
Yeah. So the next thing, so Adam says if you're still in your allocation, you're good. You can use it however you want. What happens if you go over your allocation? So say you get a query toward the end of this time period. I think allocations are measured over the course of an hour. So within this 1 hour, you can use your cores however you want. Say you're going to go over. Your allocation. There's a couple things you can have it do. The first is it just like you won't get the performance. Just like before with if you go over your allocation, your query will be throttled and things will be slow and there probably will be some baseline performance that you get. Like things won't break entirely, but queries will be slow until the next time block starts. And then I don't know all the details, and I don't know how much has been discussed other than that it's going to exist. There's going to be some amount of auto scale where you can say, hey, if I go over this cap, scale me up and charge me more for a period of time to serve these queries. And I don't want to get into too much detail because honestly, I don't know if everything I know is public or if there's more that's public than what I know.
Well, at least for what's out on the kind of the blog, the auto scaling will be just attaching an Azure subscription. So if you do go past kind of that 100% allotment during the middle of the day and you want to maintain that performance for your organization, it can go ahead and just charge you for that overage, and then that's good for like a 24-hour period. Something you want to be mindful of is, if all you're doing is going over it, every day of the week, that would be when we would recommend, either looking at upping that current capacity if it was a P1 to P2, or maybe kind of distributing that to multiple P1s.
Yeah. And
so if that is the case, go ahead.
I was just going to say, generally in cloud services, you pay less the more in advance you tell us that you're going to use the capacity. So probably auto scale would cost more than a P1, just like, reserved instances cost less than instantaneous VMs in the VM world. But I don't know if that's true.
I'll just say we don't want you to live there. I like Chewy's weekends are free.
Yeah, I mean, as long if you can get your allocation right, that's absolutely true. And the other thing we've just talked about CPU, and the reason for that is you don't have to worry about memory management, and you don't have to worry about refreshes. So in this model, you might have one query workload and a data flows workload and a refresh. And while your refresh is going, the refresh is using memory and CPU. And so if you've got a 100 gig model, you can't refresh at the same time folks are using the model because you need the memory for your refreshes. A traditional...
And we can't see the tab. Was this a premium Gen 1?
Yeah, I'm back on the premium Gen 1 with the red line. In a AAS, the traditional way to manage this was you would spin up a second capacity, deploy your model to the second capacity, process the model, and then restore that back up to your production server and shut down the processing server. And, this cost money, but it meant that your processing server was always available to serve interactive workloads. Guess what? In Gen 2, that's what they're going to do. I mean, I don't know if that's literally what they're going to do, but that's how it's going to feel. And they're not going to charge you for the processing CPU course. So your refreshes, or they're not going to charge you spikes for your refreshes. So when you do a refresh, it's going to run on a separate system. It's not going to impact your users. And the CPU cost, say I've got a refresh here that looks like this, right? It runs really hot, it runs a bunch of Power Query because I like Power Query, and then it finishes in a short period of time. Instead, they're just going to say, hey, this costs 10 boxes. We're going to spread that out over the course of the whole day. And that's all you have to pay for that refresh. And it did compete with your interactive users, and it didn't for memory or CPU. And so you can still go all the way up to the cap.
So I like some of the comments coming in, especially from Chris Wagner. He was one we were kind of targeting with this conversation too. But his was, this really comes back to the value proposition. Kind of looking at, well, what is all my time managing this over in AAS and kind of managing that complete service versus just the dynamic memory management in Power BI Premium? Yeah. Is that a benefit? Can I quantify that cost?
There's going to be so much less to manage here. You'd have to quantify how much your own time is worth, but we've just got 2 P3s on our team, and we're constantly trying to say, like, hey, should we move this capacity between, like, should we switch this workspace between these 2 capacities to see if that will negatively impact? Like, we've got one super important workload that really doesn't need very much memory, but it uses a lot of CPUs, and so we're always, like, looking like, hey, can we move this other workload onto that capacity? And then we're like, nope, too much CPU. Queries are getting slower, and like you don't have to do any of that because one, your system, so you're going to have to monitor that you're not going over your CPU consumption. Adam's right. And you have to do that now, but you also have to monitor your memory consumption and whether your refreshes are interfering with your interactives. So you have to watch your query weights. And now all you have to really watch is, did I go over my CPU allocation? And that's it. And your parallelism situation will be much better because now if you have a query that's going to go super parallel, it can go 32 or 64 times parallel instead of just 8 on your P1. So, so refreshes are better. The other thing that's going on here, let's see, Alex, did you see any other questions? I'm trying to...
No, Adam's helping us out here, at least in the chat. Kind of Gen 2 really improves the end user experience and does make the management easier, more of letting Microsoft handle it as opposed to you. So I would agree with that statement.
Yeah. So the other way that this factors into is premium per user. And when this first was announced, Chris tweeted out that he was super excited to use this for dev test. And that's a really big thing. So with a premium per user model, you can't share it with non-premium per user people. And so if you're running your production model in premium per user, you have to license every person in your organization with premium per user. Microsoft's going to do that internally, and I'm super excited because my team's going to save 5 figures a month on premium capacities and more on AAS. That's going to be great. But most organizations are not going to license every single employee for premium per user. And so you won't be able to run your production workloads in premium per user. However, if you need to do dev test and deployment pipelines, it makes a huge difference because traditionally, especially when you're at larger models where you start to run into memory problems, because your dev and your test models aren't going to consume a ton of CPU, because they're only going to have 1-2 concurrent users, and not even most of the time. Maybe your test ones will, if you're doing like a UAT model as opposed to just sort of testing your data quality. But if you've got a 30 gig model, you can't run 3 copies of the model in 3 different workspaces at the same time on one P3. I know, we tried. Because you need memory to serve queries. And you need memory for refreshes. But in premium per user, the capacity is totally separate from your P SKU. And so if you've got a model that's 30 gigs, you can have a copy in premium per user for dev, and a copy in premium per user for test, and then a copy in a P1 for production. And if you wanted to do the same thing in AAS, you need to pay us for 3 separate AAS capacities, especially because AAS doesn't even do dynamic model management. You can only have the models you have deployed are in memory all the time, and if you try and query a model and there's not enough memory, things don't get shuffled around to free up memory at all.
Yeah.
And here, not only in Premium or Power BI do you get dynamic memory management, but Premium per user means that you can have the use of one model not affect the use of your production model at all.
Good question here from Mark in the chat. If I develop on my pro license for my company and I want to have PPU to try, can I switch between both licenses? So basically at that point, it's going to be your workspace that you can say, I'm a PPU licensed user. I'm going to back this workspace as a premium per user, content workspace.
Yeah.
Then you can still have pro workspaces. So you don't need both licensing. If you have a pro right now, you can obviously step up to a PPU for your own personal use. And then it's going to be up to you to toggle. Is content premium or is it just pro?
Yeah. So for premium per user, there's going to be a monthly fee, and probably turning it on and off will be something that have to be done in the Office 365 admin portal. Probably not hey, I just want to try this out and test. I think there's going to be some trials, and I doubt there's going to be a commitment on licenses. I don't actually know how that works. I remember when we used to buy Office E3 licenses, we had a commitment, but I think that was from our reseller, not from Microsoft. I don't really know. And then if you want to test, an A SKU is still the way to go. You turn it on for 10 minutes, connect to it, poke around, turn it back off. A few days later, turn it on for a little while.
Yeah, Adam's got great comments here. I will definitely be buying Patrick and iPPU.
Yeah, for a small team, for a super, premium per user is really, really good. If you have a small team, getting everybody a premium per user license is definitely a lot cheaper than getting a big VM or a big VM with a bunch of expensive Microsoft IP on it.
Well, I think that's really kind of grills it back here a little bit. If you're in that evaluation stage of we've been doing Power BI for a while, we want to start looking at, Azure Analysis Services, I would just be like, why? If you've never been in AES, why move there? Especially with premium per user coming up. And then if you do find the value of premium while you're doing that and you want to look at widespread content distribution, then you've kind of made the business case to say, well, we should really look at the premium subscription. It's not a license, to kind of hit home on Adam's point. But at that point, I feel like the barrier is being lowered. You'll still want to look at some things, though, on the matrix. So if you do have any, global, kind of Power BI developers, it's only available in the home region of your tenant.
Yeah.
So if you're doing a lot of just, your organization is kind of central to your region, you're going to be fine. But if you're a global organization looking to do premium per user, only going to be the home tenant region. So make sure you kind of read the fine print there. Yeah. But I think it unlocks quite a bit, though, in terms of just getting people into Dataflow's AI, just huge scale now. They can kind of move past the 1 gigabyte.
Yeah, and for a lot of these, the data flows, paginated reports, and AI workloads, you don't necessarily need to broadly distribute those
No, not at all.
items to make them super useful. And so paying the however many dollars extra a month for one person or for a team of people, like, they don't then need to deploy to premium to get the value out of the AI workload. They can probably get the value that they want within their little PPU team. It depends on what you're trying to do. And I know this is a big question area about like whether or not data flows will be able to easily cross the barrier between pro and premium per user, because they want to make sure that they're not cannibalizing the entire premium business. But it's, yeah. Probably.
November through April. Everyone have their fun.
Yeah.
They will definitely be watching how you use it.
Yeah. The other thing for you guys who are just looking to test this out, I don't know for sure, but usually when we have this period where we have a preview and we haven't announced the price, it's free. And so I'm guessing when the public preview of premium per user rolls around, it might be free.
It is. November through April.
Yeah.
So you have a very long time to start building the business case, either for individual licensing or to look at maybe just premium as a whole.
Yeah, and so if you wanted to use deployment pipelines, like this is even if you already have premium capacity, you can run your dev and your test in premium per user, do all the testing you want. I know this is big for our team because we were starting to talk about getting a PSKU for dev test, because it's really painful when you've got a 30 gig model and you spend several hours deploying changes and find out it doesn't work. But also painful is paying for a whole PSKU just to sit around and do test. But the problem was we found we couldn't have both models running at once. So if we wanted to test something, we had to find a time where people weren't using our model, which was never, because we support a global team. So there's like a few hours on Saturday where nobody's working, but we're not working either. Yeah.
Go ahead and kick over to my machine. I'm going to redeem myself here with the deploy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right, so tabular editor, model.bim, deploy. We'll just do kind of the XML endpoint here, showing you how easy this is. I had to remove a few things. World importers. Next.
So you took a AAS model and you removed a few features of the model so that it fit the premium compatibility level, and then
right there,
we're redeploying it to premium.
Right here, we've got our wide world importers here now. So if I was looking at kind of settings, I can see it brought everything with me. So my my Azure SQL database, my credentials, so I'm good there. And then if I just jump back over here, kind of new reports, I'm going to use my refresh it here. Since I just deployed the metadata, there we go.
Yeah. And so with this deployed, you're still developing in SSDT and in Tabular Editor. You still have all your source control that you had when you were working in AAS. Your developer experience is the same. You're just running on a slightly different type of capacity with your deployed model. So if you don't want to use desktop to develop that way, you can still do that. In terms of the DevOps story, running on premium is totally the same as running on AAS. Now, in other shows, we've argued that you should start doing your major development in desktop, despite the not quite so good DevOps story. But that's a separate decision from whether or not I want to run my production workloads in AAS at premium. Yeah,
and one of the things that you and me have kind of talked about is just that you can't download, this file back down to a PBIX. So you're primarily relying on these external tools now.
Yeah. And so I'd say the biggest decision here is if you've got a model and you need it to run on, in AAS and S3, or like, you can probably get away running that. And because most of the people we talk to, they get bigger capacities, not because they run out of memory, but because they run out of CPU. And so if you're running an S2 and S3 and your model is not because of CPU pressure, you might be able to run that same model on a P1 along with other models. And because of your bursty CPU workload, you might get a better experience because you'll get more parallelism. And then as long as your off hours, as long as you have some seasonality to your usage, things will balance out.
And I want to kind of hit home on here. I'm forward thinking. So now that it's in Power BI, in Excel, the from Power BI dataset, obviously this is an incredible feature and functionality. It's not going to source SQL Server analysis services. It's not going to source Azure analysis services. This is looking for Power BI data sets. So if these type of features are going to be important to you kind of coming up, I know at least for right now that's on the insider ring. Maybe in some organizations it might be deployed right now if you're on E5. But this is why I'm so passionate. Like, hey, have we thought about how all of these Power BI things can just enrich the environment?
For your model consumers, consuming a Power BI model is much easier, I think, than consuming an analysis services model. They can still connect via the connection string. I
don't like pass around connection strings in the environment. That just seems like a daunting process. I'm always point and click. How can we get them connected as easy as possible? I've been a part of a few connection string things here lately, and it's just it always illuminates the issues.
Yeah. If you go back to a couple shows ago of ours, the one where we talked about security, we did talk about there are some differences in the non-admin model user roles you can create in Premium versus AAS. And so there are some, if you have lots of users that are connecting to your model to write import queries, one, you should get them to stop. But two, if that's important, their experience connecting to Power BI Premium to import data is not going to be as good because DAX Studio, if you're doing RLS, your report users, you can't give them the role they need to connect to DAX Studio. So there are some downsides or gaps in some of the connection stories, but we haven't had a problem because anytime someone complains about that, we just point them to, hey, why don't you connect to Databricks and write a SQL query instead of trying to pull an elephant out of analysis services.
Yeah, that's the paginated reports, man. I'll be curious how everyone kind of deals with that. Just writing DAX and trying to, unpackage compressed data. I'll be curious what that looks like. I still lose sleep thinking about that integration. But yeah, a couple questions in here. So just looking at analysis services kind of versus Power BI. If we remember earlier, if I was to look at file, new model, I'll kind of zoom in here. So you can do equal or kind of step up to a newer version. If you were doing 1520 in Power BI and you were like, oh, I want to scale all the way back to 1200 SQL Server 2016, you may have some issues just in terms of stepping down.
Yeah.
So thinking of forward thinking, Azure Analysis Services and Power BI are pretty close in terms of functional. It's going to be a few items like object level security where it's going to say, hey, I'm sorry, I just don't have that right now. But obviously that's a gap we're working to close. But 1200, step up to 1520, sure, if everything matches. If you do have any of those legacy partitions, it's going to ask you to just get those upgraded because Power BI does not use kind of the SQL. It uses Power Query. So the legacy integrations were built around, select star froms, etc. But these statements are easy to convert over because we know, at least in Power Query land, this is let source equals SQL.database, and then database server. Next one is going to be your table, so on and so forth. So just go to Excel, spit out these items, convert them over to Power Query, copy and paste them over. And I'm sure Daniel may even have a script for that too. But that's where I would look. If you have any AES models that are fairly small right now, if you have premium or whenever we're coming up into premium per user, does it make sense to maybe convert those over and bring those resources into Power BI?
Yeah. So, really quickly, I'm going to switch over to my screen. We had, just to sort of highlight one of Altinter's questions, which is like analysis services versus Power BI. So here I've opened Power BI Desktop, and in the task manager, you can see that desktop consists of the host, analysis services running locally, and a bunch of web browsers. And so when you're in the service, that's all that's happening. Now, in analysis services, you just get this process, and you aren't licensing folks to use their web browser to look at your reports. And so you may still need premium or pro licenses for them to look at your reports. But fundamentally, Power BI is this bundle of web browser and analysis services. And then there's also a mashup engine. So if I were to then come out here and open Power Query, we probably will see a new, I may have to actually fire a query. So let's get data, and let's just see here if I have an Excel file that has data that isn't going to be, I got a lot of data on here that I don't want to accidentally show. But if you fire up Power Query, you'll get another process that's the mashup engine, and that's this bundle. Anyway, a little bit of a tangent there.
No, that was a good one to go down.
Yeah. So I think to wrap up, because we've got about 15 minutes left. If in Azure Analysis Services, you pay a relatively modest amount, twice as much as the VM that you might otherwise run, and you get the engine, and anybody who has credentials can run queries against that engine. But you haven't been licensed to show Power BI reports. And then there's all these features we talked about. And so if you're going to do analysis services, you have to pair that with pro licenses or a P1 so that your users can look at reports that are running against your analysis services model in Live Connect. With premium, you pay twice as much again or more, but you have those Power BI licenses. Anybody you share a report with can see it. So especially at the smaller end, premium starts to make more sense than analysis services and a bunch of licenses. And then premium per user is for when you're even smaller, when you really can't, it doesn't make sense to run a P1 at all. And the cost will probably be in a range where that makes sense, where you can have not that many users and they're all on premium per user and they can all look at your report. Or they're all on pro and you're not using premium features and you have only a 1 gig model or 1 gig models. But at the high end, where say we when we promoted this episode, we sort of joked we were going to convince Chris Wagner to switch. They've got lots of premium SKUs and lots of AAS SKUs. And so some models they're running in premium because they're small and they get dynamic memory management, and some they're running in AAS so that they get all the dev features and they're cheaper. Well, the dev features, you can get them wherever you want. And now that we have this dynamic memory management plus premium per user to do dev test stuff, it's like, I suspect that you'll probably find that it's ultimately cheaper to run on Premium Gen 2 than it is in AAS, because you can have more things going, and the dynamic memory management means Microsoft needs fewer computers to serve the same workload, because we can dynamically share your workloads across lots of customers. So assuming that within an hour workloads are evenly distributed, it's probably cheaper for us to serve your queries, which means it will probably be cheaper for you. There's lots of it depends in there, and we'll have to wait and actually run some tests, but that's where I see this going.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, just fighting on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
At least on the Power BI and kind of the premium value story, to me, if you have a report developer that can extract all of the value out of all these different features and functionalities, that's what it's really about. Because if someone can see the bigger picture of data flows and AI and linked entities across workspaces and impact analysis, if they can see how all these things can change an organization, or even that simple Excel connected data set, then the value becomes present very quickly. It's whenever there's maybe a developer who's like, well, I don't know, we've got premium and we're spitting out bar charts.
Yeah.
It's like, well, then you're not doing the platform justice. So I'm hoping here, as people are kind of commenting here, if you're stepping up into PPU, then that opens a massive door for you in terms of like Power BI architecture for an organization, whether that be departmental or the complete enterprise. A lot of things are going to be opened up.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about Donald's comment here, which is to justify premium would have to move over ETL costs to enhance data flows and paginated reports instead of SSRS. Totally agree that if you're going to buy premium, you should put you should get off of SSRS and run paginated reports. I don't necessarily agree on the ETL cost. Let me go back to my screen and I will show you why.
The ETL stuff.
Premium capacity, I believe, is the most expensive per core in all of Azure.
Yep.
If you've got excess capacity lying around, you definitely want to use it, and that means if you're going to do some data flows, that's great. But if you're running extra capacity to run your ETL, you should be using anything else.
Data factory. Yep.
Yeah, because the per core cost is going to be much lower. And so if you're a small shop and you've got one P1, data flows, man. Until you run out of CPU, just go to town. And I think pro data flows are absolutely fantastic, and premium per user data flows are going to be even better. But when it comes time to hey, we need to scale up because we're maxing out our CPU and we've got data flows workloads. It's okay, it's time to refactor those to run in Data Factory, whether you use Databricks or wrangling data flows or even SSIS integration, or you run a SQL server. All of those things are going to be cheaper than running premium cores.
Way cheaper.
Yeah.
And I know we did an episode around that too, at least on the kind of roadmap coming up. They are going to have, Power Platform, so whatever that ambiguous term means, but they're going to have a Power Platform step up to Azure Data Factory data flow. Mm-hmm. So it'll be kind of a native integration where it can convert kind of these data flows from one product to another.
Because, one of the visions is that if you have Power BI data flows you take the M script, it should run in wrangling data flows in Data Factory. Now, right now, because one is sort of a SQL engine and one is sort of a Spark engine, and they're both relatively new, they don't have, like, I've never tried it, but I would be surprised if a high percentage of queries you can just copy paste over and have them work.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's very basic. Select rows is like 50-50 sometimes. I drop by like every 2 to 3 months, and I'm like, not for me.
Yeah. But certainly that's the vision of putting Power Query in all. I mean, the list of Microsoft products that run Power Query, I mean, you know, I don't think you can count them all on one hand, and you probably can't count them all on two hands now.
Yeah, we're past you.
But the vision is to be able to just move these ETL over to the right workload for the circumstance. So, like, you know, you might find, hey, one day I'm running on a P1 and I'm sort of almost maxing it out, so I need to get my ETL onto Data Factory. And then 6 months later, you need to upgrade to that P2 just for your workloads, and so now you're using, you know, 75% of a P2. Hey, it might be nice to move that data flows workload back onto the P2 until your model workload gets back up to where you don't have room for it. So moving things back and forth would be really great. I would say, so Alt-Enter, like, at this point, we're talking about a set of skills that I wouldn't expect any one person to have: report development, model development, good ETL. Like, there are folks that do that, but like within the scale we're looking at on any given project, I would sort of expect there to be at least 2 different people sharing this workload. So, like, yes, this is on the scope of, like, hey, if I want to master everything Power BI, like, learning Data Factory is a great skill, but if you're going to start learning Data Factory, that probably means when you go looking for a job, you're not going to talk about your report development.
Yep. Go ahead and kick over to my screen here in a second. Cool. Of course, it's broken. Like all things. I'm in Azure Data Factory right now, and I'm in Wrangling Data Flows, which is the Power Query interface. So, you know, some transformations are not able to be supported. They kind of give us the full list here. I'll jump out to these docs, but all of your skill set is transferable. There's gonna be a lot bigger things though that you can do in Data Factory outside of just kind of this simple point and click here.
I think the biggest reason why Data Factory is technically better to use than data flows is you have control flow. So, like, you can take and separate out rows that have an error and put them someplace to be validated. Or if you get an error, retry and fire this query when that query's done, and then when both are done, send an API call in an email. Like, all that kind of fancy stuff.
People were asking how they get started, at least with Data Factory. Catherine Wilmanson, she did a fantastic series, kind of a month long here on Azure Data Factory.
Yeah.
And it's going to go over a lot of the various pieces here. Wrangling data flows is still something that's newer, so it's not like anyone is out there specifically championing it. Like I said, it's very basic in terms of some of the Power Query that you can do. So select columns, remove columns, select rows, etc. A lot of things just are not supported. So if you're wanting to do something very, custom, all I ever get is, hey, this isn't supported. And it's like, all right, well, it's not for me yet. I still want to do kind of the low code side of things here within kind of the point and click interface. And then let me kind of jump over here as well. Let's kind of author pipeline.
Yeah.
I wanted to see. I'm going to jump back over. Here we go. Templates. Tutorials. They've got a lot here. It's going to be. Where's their templates? But they have a lot of really good, just out of the box, kind of point and click ones. Great pipeline. Yeah, I haven't been in here in a while. But copying data, moving data, oh gosh, use SQL. I forgot all about that. If you're doing any SQL Server integration services, you can also bring those workloads up in Azure Data Factory as well. So I think it's a pretty cool product. I don't spend a lot of time in it just because I think kind of Power Query, and at least in the data flows, is much more robust than Wrangler data flows at this moment.
Yeah.
Someone's machine gun typing here.
That's me. That's me. I'm thinking of getting a second keyboard that's a little quieter for some of the time.
Nice.
So, yeah. So Donald says data flows are not a replacement for a data house, like Matthew always says. Yeah, there's 3 reasons for that. One is the cost that we talked about. It's not a very cost-efficient thing for your ETL. 2, you don't get the control flow features that you would expect from SSIS or Data Factory in terms of what to do when you have errors and making multiple things orchestrate each other. And 3, when your users try to pull data out of data flows, even with the enhanced compute engine, that's only query folding for processing, right? It's not query folding for loading data into a Power BI report. And so if you've got a huge table and they only want to pull data for this year, they're going to have to wait for all of the data to download in text files, not in a compressed format. So we tried to do external data flows, basically we took our Spark data warehouse and we basically copied it into external data flows so users could choose. And we found that there was no choice because nobody wanted to pull in full tables, and it was just not a good experience.
Yeah. Right here, attach an external CDM folder.
Yeah.
One of the options.
Yeah.
And then Azure Data Factory does have kind of a newer integration where it can start writing out to the CDM format, but it is a bear to figure out.
Yeah.
I've not come across too many people that have done it successfully. It's not quite there yet, I'll say.
Yeah.
For where I would like it to be.
Yeah. Well, we're at time. Last call for any questions, and I think then we'll wrap up.
No, I think this was a good one today, at least for anyone that had maybe questions about, still looking at AAS. It still has a place and a time. I come back to still.
Yeah, it's really cheap. If you need interactive query served to something that's not Power BI, like if you're doing D3.js development and you want a really fast backend, analysis services could be a really good choice for you. Because you don't need Power BI licenses at all. But if you're doing more traditional BI and if you're planning for the long term, you're going to get more and more features that are, it's more and more painful to not have. And I think what this sentence is trying to say is don't expect to see any new features in analysis services.
I would agree with that. I mean, if you look out on their connectors, they've not been touched in a while in terms of Power Query. Some of the features like aggregates, not over in analysis services. So, I mean, to me, this is clearly what Microsoft is trying to tell you in just one statement.
Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah, and Donald's right. If you're happy to just use Excel, then you don't need premium, but you don't get auto refresh. Right? I mean, yes, your reports will they're live connect, and so you just have to press refresh when you open them. But man, that was when I used to work at a small shop and we had a bunch of reports. It was like trying to get things to refresh automatically in Excel. I'll never go back to that. I never want to have a to-do list of refresh this report when I come into work.
Just spaghetti VBA, man.
Yeah.
Runs the world.
Oh yeah, there was some real spaghetti VBA, and I'll tell you what, it never worked well enough that I could get rid of my to-do list.
Well, that's great. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again, everyone, for hanging out. Just an awesome topic. We'll kind of be back in 2 weeks then.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.